So Gary, okay, don't worry. Tell us a little bit more about your sort of story and journey to how you ended up to get to the stage where you thought you could write a book about feet.
Okay, well, I guess first things first is the book wasn't a book about feet. It was called What the Foot for various reasons. And we're not allowed to swear, so What the Foot is an appropriate title.
I'm not allowed to swear anymore, apparently. You can swear all you like.
Oh, no,
it's just me who's going to get in trouble.
Right. The What the Foot was written as a kind of play on words for the response that people had to the work because of the results that they would feel in their body, and also was also the general phrases that came out of people's mouths when I told them what I was doing. So it seemed like an appropriate title, but it was all about introducing a philosophy of human movement based on studying the human gait cycle, which is what I've been doing since about 2006. And it's basically a description of what the body does and when it does it over periods of phases through a footstep. And so how did I get there to that point where I thought I was ready to do that? Was I started off
2006 wasn't the first time you'd fiddled with feet.
2006 wasn't, no. 2000 the year 2000 was the first time I fiddled with feet. I was presented with a little foot model. I was presented with some feet, and we were working on building orthotics stroke insoles, actually was the correct term, to put into ski boots to help people feel comfortable in the boot, to enjoy a better boot fit, and to be able to wear something that fits rather than something. Notoriously, people would wear a ski boot that's too big because with the foot in its normal resting shape, that it would be comfortable in a pair of shoes or trainers would expose the problems of it inside a ski boot. So we had to reorganize the foot inside the ski boot in order to make it fit well.
You were a ski boot fitter.
Yeah.
That's where you started.
That's right.
Was that Snow and Rock, or was that?
No, this was live on the mountains in Maribel, Trois Vallées in France.
Okay. I've never been lucky enough to be able to do that, to do like live and then let them try it and then try it again. It's always been done.
No, you were a snow and rocker, weren't you? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, I think that was the baptism of fire. Was you put it on their feet, they'd go for a ski, they'd be back in half an hour if it was a problem. And so we got pretty good, pretty quick. And I felt like I had a knack for helping people with their problems and also assessing. But I didn't have any experience other than weightlifting, going to the gym from the age of 16 until I did this, which was I was about 23, 24 years old, and we're talking 20 years ago. So that tells you my age.
Yeah.
And long and the short of it was, after 7 years of working with feet daily and skiing, I had in the process become a personal trainer, sports massage therapist. And I did that because that was like a quick way for me to get more experience. Working with the human body while I was in the Alps as a personal trainer, as a massage therapist, and then finally the quest to understand what's really going on in people's bodies got the better of me. So, more so than my love of skiing. So the skiing went out the window, and I came home, started working in a gym and working with people, and just had these moments. But one of my awarenesses was that a lot of people who were working with the human body hadn't really put the foot into the human body, and that was something that I was keen to connect up. And it was obviously a basic level back in the day and so learning the biomechanics, learning the movements, meeting people along the way who were more experienced in this, giving me guidance, and eventually putting together an understanding of how the foot's moving through the gait cycle, and building that up to a point where we could see that when the foot does X, the knee does Y, and when the knee does Y, the hip does Z, and build it up, build it up, build it up, and following that through a whole journey from heel to toe. We noticed that a footstep takes about 0.6 to 0.8 seconds, and we were able to, through a diligent process, define the journey of every bone and every joint in that 0.6 to 0.8 seconds, which gave a real change, a real level of insight to that idea of observing gait. So watching someone on a treadmill versus trying to understand the journey of every bone on a treadmill. So on a treadmill, it's easy to see they're more on their left than they are on their right, or a pelvis is rotating one way, not the other.
We're talking about, when you're talking about integration and biomechanics, we're talking like, you know, full system, like from what the head's doing, what the shoulder's doing, the wrist. I mean, right the way.
Absolutely. Every single bone and joint in the body. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, this is because one of my previous talks with Tom Novella in the States last week, in terms of mechanics and you know, feet and integrating with the rest of the body. You know, he was joking when he said, yeah, podiatry had a celebration back in 1970s with champagne when they realized, yeah, the foot's connected to the rest of the body. didn't you know? You know, it's there
was a song about it, wasn't there, at the time?
Yeah, foot bone, knee bone, hip bone, backbone. Yeah, I talk to a lot of patients all the time.
Yeah,
and they're like, you know, you can't, you know. So, yes. So, tell me more. Where were we? Integrated 0.6 of a second on the trend.
Yeah, I mean, what it turns out by as we do it, that so people know the foot, therapists, body workers know the foot as pronating or supinating.
Yeah.
We can break pronation and supination down into 3 dimensions of understanding of the structures, and the structures would be the rear foot, midfoot, forefoot, toes, and be able to make an assessment. So a foot pronating is going in one direction, which has an input into the whole body. For instance, pronating foot will always encourage a pelvis to rotate away from it, and a supinating foot, which is now the foot changing its direction and traveling in the other direction, will always have the input of rotating a pelvis towards it. So anybody listening could attempt that. If they were to stand up and rotate their pelvis right, look down at their feet, you'd probably find that the left foot is more pronated than the right, assuming they had a fairly normal start position, and vice versa. And then you can do the same. You can rotate your talus bones, just rotate one, and you'll see how it has a pull and an input onto your pelvis. And so little things like this, then there's the foot's rotation have an input on the ankle, onto the knee, onto the hip joint, and basically just breaking down biomechanics. So everybody has a hip.
Well, just let me stop you 1 second, because again, I want to relate this to podiatry, and you know, I'm sure I will be told whether I'm wrong or not, but I remember seeing one of the first presentations, and it was with Howard Dannenberg at another biomechanics summer school, when he produced his Functional Hallux Limited sort of seminal sort of podiatry paper. And he talked about doing gait analysis from not just from the rear view, but also from the sagittal view, but also the coronal view.
Yeah.
Okay. And he always talked about like arm swing and different things. And I always used to look for arm swing afterwards. And, you know, it was a little bit, he described it as like the car going up the hill on the slippy slope. And if 2 tires are turning at the same time, it's all driven. But if one's quick and going quicker than the other, it's, you know, you get the back end kicking out. And I was always looking for arm swing, but I never know how to fix it or do anything with it.
Right.
I used to always think it was like SI joint problems, and maybe sort of have that sort of altered and stuff. So it definitely was sort of something pelvis. But again, it wasn't until then later on that with your integrated approach that I could figure out how then to sort of change gait with there was a limited arm swing on one side, and whether it was sort of restriction shoulder, knee, and shoulder and wrist and things. So, but his paper, I think, you know, you're aware of that paper, and I mean that was sort of changed. That did change podiatry, the way they actually viewed things, and everything changed from frontal to like sagittal, and then also coronal if you wanted to get really fancy. So I mean, you know, it's not that this wasn't. The whole body wasn't sort of thought about in podiatry from some of the mid-90s when Howard started dropping his pearls of wisdom.
Right.
But you came at it from a different approach. Not different, but
yeah, it's a difficult one. The idea of watching gait from behind gives you that frontal, what we call the frontal plane view. So in the frontal plane, I mean, the more you look at it and the more you understand what's going on, the more you can see, in inverted commas, what's happening in the other planes. But of course, we want to take a perspective of every structure, not just the foot. of its movement in the frontal plane, the movement when you look at it from the side, so the sagittal plane, and also the movement when you look at it from the top down. So the top down gives us rotational perspectives. Is there rotation in the foot? Yes, there is. They'll call it abduction and adduction, weirdly. A lot of our people like to call it internal external rotation, so it can match the movement of the leg. Frontal plane, you will see the eversions and your inversions, and that's where people start to do this with their hand, and they call this a pronation and this a supination, if this is my right foot. And I think that that's an inadequate explanation as well, because now this is purely a frontal plane movement rather than incorporating sagittal and transverse as well. And then a sagittal plane movement is where we can see the foot lengthen, shorten. You see the arch rise and fall. Joints opening on the base, joints closing on the top, etc., in order to make a pronation. And we want to take all of those components and be able to break down bone by bone, if you've got the time and inclination, to understand not only how a foot rests, so it will rest in a three-dimensional position, and it will move in a three-dimensional position, and it will move. Most people know.
Completely triplanar. I mean, it's wholly triplanar. It has to move in all three planes.
Absolutely. And the response then is when the foot pronates and you're going to bear weight on it, and the ankle flexes, the knee will flex, the hip will flex, and that's all sagittal plane, so that will all be seen from the side. But the hip is also a three-dimensional entity, which is going to incorporate a frontal plane, hopefully an adduction, and a transverse plane, hopefully an external rotation. And hopefully that flags a few questions for people, because a lot of people think it's the opposite. But by virtue of knowing where the pelvis was and the hip femur was and where it's going, we're able to decipher exactly what it should be doing at what moment in time. Now, as the pelvis is rotating away, previously discussed, as the foot's pronating and pelvis is rotating away, all of a sudden, if my rib cage has the intention of traveling forwards, then we've put a rotation already into the spine. But that rotation can be exaggerated, and that allows me to get my left arm forward, countering my right leg forward. And now you have the arm swing in place. So it didn't take very long to get there. Then you've got glenohumeral joint mechanics, scapular mechanics, clavicular, sternoclavicular mechanics, all playing a part in their ability to swing that arm. And then, of course, injury history comes into play. So broken arms, broken collarbones. Is it feasible that those things can actually hold back? And
jaws from rugby. And I remember,
anything. So any injury.
When I had my work done, it was like I had to get my chin over here to the thing, because I got punched there and it knocked it all out there.
Yeah, I also broke my jaw in '94, and there's a lifelong journey to follow that through. But each injury, each impact, each compromised structure that you've ever had in your life, if it learns a new way of movement, that movement will actually feed into the whole system. So if I can't externally rotate this wrist because of a fracture, I find it easier to internally rotate and harder to externally rotate. Unconsciously, my movement habit will not be to externally rotate my arm. And we know that when the arm swings forward, it has an external rotation element to it. So if I struggle to swing that arm forward because of an injury I had to my arm, I'm going to struggle to rotate the rib cage away from that arm. I'm going to struggle to experience the opposite movement in the pelvis, and struggle to get the opposite leg forward. And often you can often see how people fall into those patterns. Now, if I'm dominantly left leg forward and dominantly not able to get my right leg forward, then you'll start to see that I spend more time on that left foot, more weight on that left foot. Is that what's causing that foot to be more pronated? Is it what's causing its troubles? If it's unable to sit on a tripod, is that highlighting, because I now spend more time on it with more weight on it, is that now highlighting issues under certain metatarsal heads, which we might lead to things like neuromas? And that neuroma could be the shouting loudest, but the problem may stem all the way back to that arm. And so what do you treat? And there's a lot of schools of thought, which I completely subscribe to, which is not to chase the pain, or don't just treat the pain, but actually try to get underneath. And this is what I feel like I've always been about, is trying to understand or help somebody understand why they might be having the trouble that they're actually having. And then through a detailed investigation, bone by bone. Let's go back from that sore metatarsal head all the way back, checking off injuries, checking off movement potential. Can you rotate your pelvis left? Can you rotate your pelvis right? Can you rotate both femurs left and right equally? Can you pick a movement, pick a body part, and we'll be checking to see if that is actually capable of doing its thing, because we end up with
also one of the fascinating things was that I took from you is it's the joints act and then muscles react.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is completely contrary to normal training.
Yeah, it is.
That myself and colleagues would have done. So let's sort of like lay that out for people a little bit now as well.
So as we're talking about joint mechanics there, we've just done like a nice sequencing up the body, or even from an arm down the body to the foot. Joints act, muscles react is the idea that there's another rule that we should bring in that couples with that, which is muscles lengthen before they contract. Yeah. And the way to bringing that in first before we tackle the next.
So is that an isokinetic, isometric? Is that like a eccentric, concentric? I mean, what are we?
Eccentric, concentric. But again, what we've got is a industry that has separated a single muscle contraction into 3 titles: concentric, shortening under load; eccentric, lengthening under load; isometric, neither under load. But what I want to really impress upon people is that when in observing human movement, is that a muscle, as a joint moves away from its resting centered position, that joint is encouraged. Let's say you've got a neutral vertebrae. As soon as I move away from that centered resting position in any direction, I'm going to open one side or the other, front, back, left, right. And what's going to happen then is that a muscle is going to lengthen. And arguably, you could say a muscle is going to shorten. But the energy is always in the lengthening side, because the lengthening side is the one that is exposed to risk. So the brain then will trigger a contraction when the muscle is at its longest or towards in its lengthening space. So the muscle contraction, the actual concentric part of that contraction, is when the joint is open or the muscle is lengthened. So we contract when we're lengthening back towards shortening, not back towards neutral, not from neutral to a point of being short. And when you observe the whole structure, let's say you put your left leg forward and you put length into your hip flexor. That hip flexor, when it gets towards its end range, will contract from its lengthened position back towards a resting position. The leg brings through, but I think momentum tends to do that, because we seem to, as soon as it swings forward, we now have to put energy into the hamstrings. So as we're coming into heel strike, those hamstrings are lengthening. And then it's when we get the heel on the ground that the hamstring will then kind of begin to contract in certain parts of itself in order to flex the knee and weight bear on the foot.
It doesn't contract along the whole length the similar way.
Well, we see that in the model. We see that no muscles really contract at both ends at the same time, distal and proximal. So muscles are working all of the time. They're never actually off. So the thing that's triggering them or giving them a purpose is the joint, which is the joints act, muscles react. So if you've got to get the joints into position in order to stimulate the tissue to have something to do. So what I always say is joints give muscles something to do. And when those when you come across areas of tension in the body where muscles are what we might describe as locked along, they're going to be locked along because the joint is unable to go through its movement, which is going to be to enable that muscle to actually shorten. But somebody then might say, well, but that muscle, it can't contract because it's locked along. We need to teach it to contract. But my argument is what we need to do is to look at the chain of events that actually enables that joint to close, which will finally allow the muscle
we could go down the whole route of trying to isolate muscles and like activate glutes and stuff, but I don't think that's the conversation for today.
Well, it's really simple. For many years, personal trainers have been lying people on their front to try and get them to extend their hip or to do clams and extend, abduct, externally rotate the hip via a conscious contraction of the glute. And you know, there was always things like you're using your back too much, that's your hamstring, let's try and get into the glute. You can't get into the glute if you can't find it. And you can't find it because you can't access the joint movement very well. So we teach people to move the joints, for one. And number two is we do the opposite. We'll put them into a position where the glute has no option but to contract. And that is to flex it because it's got no option but to extend next. Adduct it, so it's got no option but to abduct it. And you can internally rotate it because it's got no option but to externally rotate it. And under those conditions, the brain finally contracts and the glute recognizes what it is able to do. And so because the glute has to do it, it does do it. Whereas when you lay it down on the front under conditions of faulty mechanics, the brain will do whatever it can to lift the leg off the ground because that was the cue. And if that means using the low back, then it will always go to the low back. So organizing the mechanics is the key. I think we should just caveat here because what I don't want to do is end up on a road where it's my way or the highway, because both are valid. Muscles can be contracted from neutral to short. We find in movement that they contract from long back towards neutral, then momentum takes over. And that anything that already pre-exists in anatomy is probably right. There's just a side of it that hasn't been looked at. And some of the model, some of the things that our body does choose to do, and dictated by joint surfaces, some of the movements that our body is expected to go under, such as a foot pronation, such as a valgus knee, are necessary parts of a walking gait cycle. And too many areas of this field are trying to shut those things down. They're called bad, they're called evil, we want to prop them up, when actually we just want to promote them, because realistically, if your foot has the capacity to pronate and supinate, and we could do that, it actually means a huge amount for the whole body. We can put so much potential back, not by taking joints out, but by adding them back in.
And I mean, and again, back to the sort of triplanar model of motion, which is like, everything has to work in those three planes. I mean, sitting down doing your clams, your side-lying turnouts, seems to be, how's that working a muscle in a triplanar? It's not, is it?
Well, it will be externally rotating and abducting. You'll take out the extension part of it. There's a feeling, so you can be training something there, so you can get that feeling into the glutes. The question, moreover, is how functional is it? Like, what actually is the goal of the glute? Is the goal of the glute just to be felt, or is the goal of the glute to decelerate the foot pronation? And as a result of lengthening when that foot is pronating, being now given no option but to contract, starts to extend the hip and supinate the foot, which is the very thing that will propel us forward in life. That's the function of the glute. It's a muscle on the back of the hip that propels us forward. It's not just a cushion for sitting on, and it's certainly, we call it, I use the wake up thing just because it helps people, because so many people have been told your glutes are sleepy or this VMO is sleepy, you want to wake it up. I'm under no illusion that they don't sleep, that they're always active, they're always on, and that they're always doing what the joints are informing them to do. And so if the joints aren't informing them of much, because pronated foot doesn't move a lot and it can't supinate, it doesn't feed much movement to the knee, you don't get a lot of response in the hip, all of a sudden the glute has nothing to do. Somewhere, something will be overworking to make up for the underworking, and that's where we start to see people's problems show up.
And as you say, it doesn't work when we're sitting on it, but of course now we sit on it, up in the morning, into the car, onto the train, sit
if
for
you're lucky,
hour.
not in lockdown.
Lockdown. But well, this is the thing. One of the physios that I first worked with when we were doing all this trans-ab glute stuff and things was, we're hunter-gatherers. Here's the deer. Pack your bags, lads. We're off we go. I mean, that's why the foot is a mobile adapter, because the great Ray Anthony that first told me that foot problems first started when man invented the wheel and needed a hard, flat surface to run on. The reason the foot articulated is we're chasing that deer down over the next 2-3 days over the bog where it's all undulating ground. Let's go. That's it.
Yeah.
Then we sit in our hours for 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day. It's a different sort of.
Yeah, and I think what you're alluding to is behaviors and habits, and I think the human system is influenced heavily by our behaviors and our habits. So habits can be the way your foot hits the ground is the way that it thinks currently that is the best way to do it, given the structure of everything else, everything working together. This is the best sum of a foot movement that I've got when I put it on the ground. And what you find when you're walking over force plates is that there's a huge amount of repetition. So every foot step you take is pretty damn close to being the same. And that means that going backwards in time, it's been the same as well. And then your response to the knee, in the knees movement to the foot, your response in the hip, the response in the pelvis is also dictated by this particular habit. And I'm not saying the problem's in the foot. The problem could be in your shoulder, as you alluded to with the arm swing thing, and winding it down and giving your foot no choice but to work the way it works.
Yeah.
So you're finding your way. You are finding your way the best way you can. And sometimes we might just need to change that way. If we can change the habit, we can influence the foot to move differently. We can teach the hip to move differently. We can change the timings of things in the gait cycle. But a lot of this work, as you'll know, having experienced it and worked with it, and I know people around you use it as well,
yeah.
A lot of it is an unconscious, under the radar thing. So we aren't telling people when to contract their glute, and we aren't telling people when to pronate their foot or supinate it or straighten
like breathing. You don't need to
it's
think
like
about
breathing.
it.
This has to be something that we get good at doing, uninfluenced and without thought. Because my colleague Chris, who you well know, will say we're human. We can't even walk down the road and text at the same time. So
I can.
you might be an advanced human. That's why you're trying to podcast on three things at once.
Yeah. But hold on, just before we go on, there's quite a few people, colleagues on lurking, of course, on Facebook and stuff. So if you know, I'm sure this is the time, colleagues, for when you thought the question that you wanted to ask Gary. You know, here's the opportunity. So I've got Simon Spooner, Ian Riley, all ready to, you know. So let's have a couple of questions, and we can shoot at Gary now in a few minutes. But yeah, just continue on. Yeah, we don't have to think about it. It's like breathing. But then that also brings me back to, and you were saying it's a neural. I mean, there's such a neural component in this, and of course that's where footwear can come in. You know, because it always struck me as the body gets the information proprioceptively, and where it is in spatial. So the foot hits the ground, get the feedback, but of course now you've got your new Nike Air trainers on, so your foot hits the ground, you get the feedback, and then it's like, oh shit, hold on a second, there's something else going on here. My foot's now sinking down into the ground, so you gotta like decelerate this now, and then you gotta like, you know, so footwear in terms of how this fits in and changing what patterns are.
I think it's a very difficult one. It's a difficult question. People are very passionate, and I've discovered emotional about it as well. I think it's more about what your foot is capable of doing than the shoe that you put it in. Obviously, I think you need to find a shoe that's comfortable. You need to find a shoe that doesn't have too many gimmicks that could compromise what you're doing, such as, you know, wide heels will make you have an early heel strike, or a big far back heel sticking out behind you. Obviously, you've just mentioned about cushioning. Surely the foot has its own cushioning mechanisms. But the more compromised our feet are in daily life, which is what we generally tend to find out, that most people's feet are compromised, then the
stuck inside leather coffins, as one colleague Street talks about them. Leather coffins. Yeah.
Again, I'm just not a big fan of because I think what that does, Justin, is people suddenly start to go down a rule of blaming the shoe, when there's actually a hell of a lot that can be done in our own body, in our own feet. And we have a Wake Your Feet Up program, which is where people are taking a set of wedges and putting them in a certain place and doing a few movements and influencing mechanics in their feet that they've not exposed themselves to before, just because of their own limitations and the coffins they choose to put their feet in. So, but that is going to make a difference in how they feel when they put the same shoe back on, because they now have better movement in their feet. Plus that movement, the intention is to integrate it up into your whole body so it feeds better into the hip. So my advice is always, can you have better functioning feet? Can you just have better functioning feet? That is feet that both pronate and supinate, because feed up to the body. So
it's all about also that, I mean, the foot's, the joints have to be able to access the full triplanar movement, and then you know.
Yes, of course. And if a shoe is compromising that, then that would be an issue. So if they were really tight and narrow or poorly fitted, just some shoes have varus forefeet built into them. Some, you know, there's all these little shoe gimmicks that that,
Mhm.
and most gimmicks exist because of problems that they're trying to help and overcome.
Yeah.
But
And
you
just
do you
talk
want
about a little bit more about but the whole that whole triplanar. I mean, because that's always been the way with like orthotics. You know, we get a very pronated foot type in with an axis that is somewhere over like there, so the medial side, and the foot's completely flat on the floor. So that pes planus, pancakes type of foot that we would have tried previously, or I would have tried years ago to try and to do something with an orthotic, and we'll get on to like what orthotics and stuff do in a second. But it was like that foot is pronated beyond where you can do anything. So then how do you know, because you're all about, you need to have the pronation and the supination, so you need to have the full range of triplanar movement. So at that extreme, and that's obviously an extreme foot, but just lay out a little bit more about the whole,
So I'll just take you all the way back to the first two rules. Joints act, muscles react, and muscles lengthen before they contract. Now, if you critically analyze, and I don't know how many people have done this, I still have issues with people talking about toe flexors and stuff like that. So a toe flexor will cross not just the toe and the metatarsal, but runs underneath the foot and runs up across the ankle. So we're not talking about a toe flexor just flexes the toe. We're talking about it has a response to the movement of the whole foot. And what you'll find is that the vast majority of muscles are actually supinators. That means that they are also responsible for decelerating pronation. So as a foot becomes more and more and more pronated and flat, as you've tried to describe there, those muscles of supination are under less and less and less possibility to function because they're now in a really long situation. And looking at the muscles, looking at the joints, they cross, looking at the bony positions that they rest in, you can, it takes a while, but you can start to see how these muscles are actually set up to do that. So my invitation is always, as long as it's pain-free, is can we introduce them to a way to joints act, muscles react, which is pronate those bones a little bit more to give those muscles a little bit of a chance to speak to the brain, to give it no option but to contract. And that contraction just so happens to be the first supination of its kind, where it starts to try and gather the bones back together. Of course, it's not going to happen immediately. We're not going to see a foot reset to neutral.
It's not supination past the back of where whatever neutral is, and it's
we
pronated.
Might just be looking for this.
We're talking about supination as in less pronated.
Yeah. And I was going to say, the general idea, the idea is that you want to kind of get the subtalar joint back to neutral, create an arch or whatever. And you know, nobody builds orthotics like that. You'd give it a start, you'd give it a chance. But are you denying it the opportunity to experience a pronation? They might still need this orthotic, but can you, in an environment aside that, in their home, encourage them with safe, correct movements that actually help them to open those joints underneath, stimulate that tissue more, and have it contract? And you'll notice that what I'm talking about is pronating the foot. The foot that is pronated and laying almost flat on the ground, as you described, has, by the way, also run out of room to pronate more because the ground is in the way. So we have to do something. We have to make a shape, a change, which is what we use just wedges for, to encourage more pronation type movement into that foot so that that tissue can lengthen. Because if you remember when we talked about habit, you're going to go back over countless footsteps, and that foot's been the same every time. It's never had that chance to go longer than its current resting position. And so we've got to give it that chance so that the brain can go, you know, oh no, I'm actually pronating more than normal. I need to contract that tissue and start supinating. And the difference here, which is what I wanted to say just before you say that, if you don't mind, is a lot of people will then say, you need to supinate that foot. And that tissue under the foot is really long and nasty and gnarly. So we need to, I don't know, roll it, foam roll it, lacrosse balls. You hear all of this stuff. Start scrunching and scooping. But none of those movements teach these muscles actually to decelerate a pronation and activate a supination. And so that's the process that we'll go through and take people through.
Because as you said, give the brain a chance to. So it's all processed central nervously. I mean, this is this is back again. Some if people have listened to some of my previous talks, with well, especially with Ronnie Ward, who it's all
David.
about how things are processed central nervously. It's that's that proprioceptive feedback. It's the only information it has been giving is because of all the info from the neural. And
the weird thing that you find from looking at gait and following the model is that it might be that foot is like that for a reason, that it has an intention, which is to move another part of the body, which I know is a big leap for a lot of people, but we've seen it many times. So sometimes it's still not a single area conversation. There's the ability to look at and hold the whole body in your mind when you're working with someone and work with them together, which is where the patterns become more and more integrated throughout the process. So I'm not just pronating a foot, but we might be working with a pelvis to help the two team together so that you can get the best experience.
Yes. But all processed centrally, of course. And it's because that was my start with. That's how I ended up. We talked slightly earlier before about Snow and Rock, and I will be interviewing Bernard in a couple of weeks. My French ski alignment guy, and I saw him at a course in Birmingham again last thing of the day, and it was that just tricked in my mind. It was like anybody who's skied and anybody who hasn't. Skiing's about initiating turn on an edge. So if your one foot's already slightly more pronated, well then, if you need to get more onto that edge and you're already lost your range of movement, then you're having to do something with your knee or your hip or your shoulder to turn it. And that was back in 97, 98, which when I first started looking
exactly.
at stuff with Bernard.
So that's a perfect example, actually, Justin, because if I really need to get that foot over onto the outside edge and I don't have the capacity to do that in my foot, knee, hip relationship, then I'll end up throwing my left arm around to make that happen. And the later and later it gets in that curve, the more I shit myself going towards the rock. So we can start to.
I always used to say, even with patients that you would meet or just talk about, when you start to question them, they always turn stronger one side to the other. Well, normally, I'm shit off my left. And so when I'm positioning myself on a mountain, I can't ski. As you say, I'm always like, which side am I going to have to turn closer to that sort of like rock or the thing off? And I hopefully
we all have strong sides. We all have favourite sides. We all have strengths.
So that mechanics stuff. That's where that first came from. With Bernard was that ski alignment, and I was fascinated how you could take basically foot biomechanics and apply that to something else sports specific. We did ski stuff, cycling, or all the orthotics things. But that was fascinating.
I said the other day that the sports that we do, Justin, are they're not. We don't have biomechanics. We don't choose biomechanics for a sport. The sports that we do are based on our biomechanics. And our biomechanics are based on the joint surfaces at the end of each bone, which dictate how the bone articulates with the bone next to it. So we're at the mercy of what these things can do. So if we paid more attention to them rather than the muscles, we actually might be able to organize the muscle system quicker, dictate, influence, give people a positive experience for movements that are more efficient, more effortless, and enable that sport to be carried out with more ease. Mm-hmm. That's what we do when we work with athletes.
Yeah. So it's sort of like the system is sort of quieter. Yeah. Is that, I don't know where I'm getting that from, but I don't think that's specifically from I learned that when I work with you guys. But the system is.
You don't want a noisy system. A noisy system has got a lot of limitations in it. It's got a lot of joints that have lost their way, and so there's a huge amount of effort going on in areas of the body to override those limited areas. That effort will end up being in the place that shouts loudest that you want to have treated. If we treat that rather than the thing it's working for, nothing's going to change, because as soon as you go back to activity, it's going to be working hard still for the thing that's limited. The thing that's limited is making no noise at all most of the time. The thing that we need to work on is not the one saying I'm in pain. and therefore is often not the bit being treated. And so to be able to find that piece, I wanted a map that I could navigate that would help me find it more easily, and that's really what the flow motion model enabled me to do.
Let's touch on footwear and on orthotics now as well, because again, you started off as a ski. You made footbeds, insoles, orthotics for patients. From the get go. I mean, this is something that it isn't just sort of completely. I'm not too sure whether some certain colleagues were worried at the time that what the foot. And of course, it came at the same time of the whole sort of like barefoot and different things.
Yeah,
was maybe a criticism of sort of podiatry, but
not at all.
That was just that. But tell us. I'll let you go first because we did have a conversation with colleagues a couple of weeks ago. I'll let you in. What they reckon, what the current thinking now is from some of the orthotic labs is that orthotic is just a load modifier. I've got other friends who just think it just stabilizes the first ray and allows propulsion more. People are aware of what my thoughts on orthotics are in terms of just allowing slightly more sagittal plane movement. What do you think an orthotic does, Gary?
Well, my only experience of it is in the ski boot fitting industry, where the goal of that was simply to enable the foot to rest more centered so that it could have a better position to move from in the ski boot. And I remember the conversation, the more rigid a boot or the more rigid a piece of footwear, the more support you probably need in there. And that made sense to me at the time, because if an ankle is sitting quite medial, it puts pressure into the medial part of the boot, and the boot is, it's kind of hard. I'm tapping on this granite surface here in front of me. As the foot pronates, it gets longer, pushing your big toe into the end. It pushes your little toes out into the lateral corner as the forefoot abducts. So all of a sudden there were compromised areas where you could actually tell the person, you look at the foot, you're going to try this boot on, and you give them the experience of all those pressure points, and you tell them it's going to hurt here, here, and here, just because you've seen the shape of the foot. The orthotic, which it was an insole, as you know, like by CDAS or Conformab, or a Superfeet or something like that, was simply designed to pick that rear foot up, bring the STJ back towards a semblance of neutral, take the ankle away from the side of the boot, pull the fourth and fifth toe away from the side of the boot, and draw the big toe back. Therefore, the person feels a little more comfortable. They stand squarer on the ski, so there's less of this, more of this. It's easier to find the edges, and they come back and say, that was the best day skiing I've ever had. And they also would say things like, oh, my back stopped hurting today. What did you do? And of course, at the time, I didn't have a clue. But then I
had that before one time, just like, again, never mentioned it to somebody, but you might have people you're coming in going like, I didn't tell you, but this back thing I had for ages is gone. With whatever.
The old orthotic advertising would be valgus knee, flat foot, hiked hip, and then with the orthotic, nice and straight. And for me, that was always the intention of the orthotic, is to bring a body back to neutral, or bring the base. Like we talk about setting the base, and so an orthotic is helping you set the base. It's going to take pressure off certain areas, which is fantastic. The extension that I've always invited on the back end of that is, can we also re-educate those feet in how to move in that unconscious way, so that they've got a lifelong tool in their body, rather than just relying on an orthotic. So they're hand in hand for me. Use it or lose it. Exactly. Yeah. So I like to think that that's a positive message, and I think that people who are given that opportunity to move their feet bones. I mean, it's a huge industry at the moment, is going and looking for ways to strengthen my feet up. And more teachers are coming out. I'm not necessarily agree with everything that they're doing. I think things can be done quicker, but I think most of it is still in the realm of muscles act, joints react. Whereas if we flip it to joints act, muscles react, can I stand in my living room and reorganize my own feet through some guidance of how the foot moves? And it's a completely possible thing to do. So it is possible for us all to help people move their feet better, as well as support their feet better, and have them feed information up to the brain through the rest of the body at a better level than we've been for a long time.
Yeah. And so what is yeah? So I mean, so what's next then for the development of this? Do you think? Well, I know you've got another book coming out soon.
We have
which is
yeah, you swine. Told you not to talk about that. This book we've been trying to put together the model, so in a book form, so that everybody can get their hands on it. It's been a huge job.
When the first book came out, I think some colleagues of mine in podiatry world, it was like, who's this guy? Blah 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 blah. And one person was like, oh, he's using the you know, the tri stool thing. Next. And everybody who knows who I'm talking about, if you pay any
listen, I'm fully aware.
And I know that was
that what the foot ruffled a few feathers. I don't have a problem with that. I think it was it's still a useful book to understand the philosophy, to introduce you to our work. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek. I'm older now than I was then, and I'm more understanding now than I was then. But I still think as a way of introducing philosophies of movement is really valid.
Yes.
The idea that the foot was the forgotten body part, I think, is still valid. And if we change it from forgotten to still misunderstood for the most part, and obviously I'm not including podiatrists in that, but a lot of people also working in the bodywork field.
Sometimes I am. Sometimes I am, because we'll go out here. I don't care. I think some colleagues will just qualify, and some colleagues will just qualify, and they've got their little bit of You think you know biomechanics? Yeah. No. Yeah. No. I tried to get my head around this type of looking at biomechanical system, and it's just completely enthralls me. And and it would probably take me personally probably about a year or more to actually get to grips with this whole motion model. And how I would process that into. And what I did, I shortcutted that, and I just worked with other therapists that were experienced in this model in my clinics. I brought it into my clinic because I thought it was so amazing to the changes that we could affect with patients in such a very, very short time. And just on a personal
And you're speaking to one of them tomorrow, aren't you?
Yeah. On a personal note, I mean, I have a people are familiar. I had my hip replaced last October, and when I first went with Ronnie in Galway about 4 or 5 years ago, and I left my hip go far too long. I remember our first session with Ronnie, because Ronnie said he could hear me coming up the stairs. It was that bad in my gait.
On one side.
20 minutes, half an hour work, just accessing range of movement that I hadn't been able to before, just showing me what the body could do. That evening, that next day, I walked all around Galway, no aches and pains, or
I think if genuinely, Justin, if we can focus on the real limitations in the system, it gives and you're able to give some of that back and re-experience that and educate that into the system, it does make a big difference. It does make a big difference. And so that the model, the flow motion model, is the book that we're putting together. It's been a huge job. And as I said to you before we came on air, I can't give a date because we're still working on artwork, and it takes a long time to put something like this together. So it will be ready at some point. We have been lucky enough to be able to take our education online for starters, a beginner's 101 introduction into that thinking. On our website, because obviously we don't know when our course schedule will pick up again at the moment, or where we can, even if we can.
This is you lecture and train in this system all around the world. Every time I see you, you're back in the States, or you're in Australia again, or
we've been lucky enough to teach everywhere. We've been lucky enough to go everywhere. So, well, not everywhere, but many places. And people still ask us to go to more places.
And the great thing, of course, about that is that it means that there are practitioners of anatomy and motion in lots of different countries. So people have patients, or they find you. A colleague in Dublin
there are people who use the work. Yes. Which there's a list on our website as well for that people can.
Is Zoom calling? Yeah, because I know a colleague in Dublin is Zoom calling you know, Tanzania and Azerbaijan and, you know, Canada.
Yeah.
And these, you know,
Well, the interesting thing is
this,
on,
you know,
on Zoom, one of the most useful tools that you'll have is the ability to see movement and explain movement for somebody to experience movement that is actually going to directly benefit their body.
yeah.
So we're not talking about a workout over Zoom. We're talking about very specific inputs into their own system to try and get these limitations going. So a lot of people are getting a lot of great results on Zoom, and that's one of the first things that we did with our community when lockdowns and quarantines started happening all over the world, was to make sure that we gave them the support to up their game in that regard, which I know they're very grateful for. So a lot of people getting a lot of good results, whole body results orientated through in current times as well. And to add to that,
it is a whole body integration.
It is, and what I've been able to offer is the support videos where people, as I've said, you can take me into your own living room and work away with me for a few hours, if you so choose, on a regular basis, to begin to reorganize your structure in a way that will serve your whatever's going on in your body. Again, it's about you taking ownership of your body, self-assessing your system based on the guidance that we give you, so that you can see if you bend easier to the left or the right. And if you find it harder one way, then we're going to practice it a little bit, and then we're going to integrate it into the structure below, the structure above, and work it all the way down until you're into an upright whole body position. And the feedback's just been wonderful. So giving people permission to find their limitations rather than treat the things that are sore has actually proved a really good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's always that, away from that. It's always like, we're talking about the pain, and that isn't a pain. We're pain hounds. It's just like, where's it sore? And then the next week, it's like, where's that? Is it still sore? Is that still?
Yeah, and if it's still sore, you didn't get to the nuts of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like all this. Yeah, you know, and that again, we talked last week, which should be out soon if people haven't seen it. That whole psychosocial model of how people experience and what difference experience it is from one person to another, and how much different.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and it's all valid.
Well, yeah. And so, Gary, how can people find more about you? So tell us a little bit more about where they can.
So we have a website which is www.findingcentre, finding centre spelled the British way, centre.co.uk. And what we have on there, as we just mentioned, is the find a practitioner list. We also have find help list, sorry. We also have the series we talked about, the online education introduction, the Wake Your Body Up program, and the Wake Your Feet Up program as well. And also that's where you can find what the foot is.
There is quite a lot of stuff already on. I mean, I still give my patients the access to some of your Vimeo videos, even just your hamstring flexibility stuff ones and things
on YouTube.
On YouTube, all done in triplanar movement and stuff. I mean, absolutely fascinating. To resource.
I look quite young in that one, Justin. 2009, I think. But to paint a point, that those movements haven't changed really over the year. That's 11 years ago I made that video, and that's because the model is the model and the joint shapes are the joint shapes. So it's
just before we get, we'll probably run this another 5 minutes, but I'd really love a question off the Facebook Live from some of the colleagues that are watching, but nobody's got any questions for you guys. They must understand it all, perhaps. Do you think? Yeah,
maybe. Yeah,
maybe they do.
But hopefully it's kind of logical. Hopefully it makes sense. The body is the body. It moves in a certain way that we can learn and work with, and that's what we've been doing, traveling world teaching, and people are having great results doing it. And I hope to be able to do it for a long time.
And again, so I mean, have we got any sort of because that will be the next question, or that will be the thing, and where's the research? So are we starting to sort of we're getting practitioners now who are using the model to sort of research? And I was on with a colleague the other day, and we discussed that, how it's so difficult in especially in private practice or in to actually do research, because there's so many so many variables and things that you need to take into consideration. I don't know whether you saw, but David Cashley, a colleague in Scotland, is just about to publish, or he's writing his MSc, and it was all about just simple manipulation of met heads for neuroma pain. And that was all they did. Same practitioner, same mobilization. The outcomes are, but that's taken years of, and he's going to have to defend it before he can publish it. But
it's a long road.
It's difficult. It is a very long road. Is there any sort of, well, again, and that's a long road in any manual therapies. So is there any sort of, anybody crunching numbers or looking at sort of things that we could maybe get some validation out of this? Or is that going to be somebody else has got, somebody else?
Yeah, probably going to be somebody else's job. Might be part of the idea of getting the book out and ready so people can start to challenge it in that way. We've gone down the road with certain people.
Wants to know, where's the published data? Which of course is always what it's going to go back to. There isn't, so
there isn't.
But no, but we're not
any,
talking.
and I don't. I'm totally happy with that.
But there's loads of. I mean, there's loads of published data. There's loads of published data on neural CNS processing and different movement of joints and how that affects these sort of.
There's lots of things that when you pull it all together will start to make sense in certain areas. There are also things that the model brings, papers that people will rely on, that are brought into question when you look at the model's movement and you look at the way that the body responds to movement. So a lot of people will say, there's no data, it's all anecdotal. And I guess over the years I've got comfortable with that. Professors who have looked at the work, or people who've taken the work to people in universities, it always gets somewhere close to the end and then breaks down because you can't put a control into the human body and still expect it to work like in an unconscious thing. So it's almost as if it doesn't warrant it. But people have done stuff, but it never really gets very far. It never really gets.
That's it. I mean, especially in the orthopedic community, but I mean, I don't certainly, just because you've stuck in 200 or 2,000 like of a certain joint and you've written a load of research out of the back of it, doesn't really sort of push things along.
Don't get me wrong. I'd absolutely love it if it was done and possible and people went, oh, okay, then that would be great. But it's not there yet. So we just continue to do our thing. And I know that people will get on board with it and other people won't get on board with it. And that's always been the case. And that will probably always be the case. So it's, I don't know, it's an absolutely fascinating way of working with the human body, fascinating way of observing it, fascinating how all these things piece together. And I'd invite anybody who's in the least bit interested to have a look at what we're doing and see how it feels, and at least see how it feels in your own body.
Yeah, as I said, and again, this is a series of interviews that with people who changed the way I look at my practice. And so some 7-8 years ago, because I was aware of what you were doing before this. I mean, this is it just took it again on to a fully I'd been looking for this since I saw Howard Dannenberg talk about it when he did his FHL stuff. How do I make that arm swing? So this has been the journey, and when I found what you were doing, that was another piece into the continuing sort of journey and puzzle. And I like it so much.
As we said at the beginning, it's a simple explanation. Sorry, Justin. Sorry, talking over you. I was just saying as we said at the beginning, it's a simple explanation of what the body does and when it does it through the gait cycle, based on joint surface anatomy. So it is what it is.
Yeah. Okay, Gary. I'm sure this will stimulate some debate. There's Dockery. Sorry, Doc, that you missed a little bit late, but we will have this recording up on Facebook, and it will go out. Toby, hold on a second. Where's Toby gone? Interesting conversation. Oh yeah, well, Toby, but yeah, Toby was a physio who worked with me in Snow and Rock up in Covent Garden, and yeah, Toby. Well, Toby spent 10 years out in Val in Teen, working in the medical centre there.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
working with a lot of gears and stuff. You know, so I mean, Toby had great fun. Had great
Uh,
fun there.
it was busy, I
It
imagine.
was, yeah. Some of the stories. It was, and so yeah, but he doesn't. He's not a physiotherapist anymore. He's moved over to the dark side of medical repping and sales and stuff. But it's you know, it's been fascinating, Gary, and you know, I'm sure we will revisit this again. And yeah, it should stimulate some conversation. Cheerio, everybody. Any questions, you can drop a line to me. Until next time, I think we're on again tomorrow afternoon with a colleague, Anthony Claffey in Dublin. So talk soon. Bye bye.